Welcome to Resilience Unravelled. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Thackeray. This podcast is a result of my fascination with health issues, resilience, performance, mental health, accountability and critical thinking, along with many of the other obsessions I bump into in my life. I spend my time working with highly successful teams, organisations and people, and this podcast introduces their remarkable stories, as well as my synthesis of the key issues, tips and strategies to thrive in life. If you find this podcast useful, you can also find other information at qedod.com or russellthackeray.com. Stay tuned to the end for details of how to order a free ebook. Enjoy the podcast. So today I'm talking to Michelle Dickinson. Now Michelle's a very interesting person, and I think she's got some fascinating stories and has also written what appears to be a really fascinating book. So hi Michelle.
Hello Russell, thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure, and I can tell by the accent immediately that you're not from the UK, so where in the world are you?
I am from New Jersey in the US.
Yeah.
I've been a resident of my town for quite some time, and I'm a US woman here.
Fantastic. Now I'm trying to do my geography. New Jersey, that's near
New York City.
Of course it is. I was just saying that just to test you. Fantastic. Well, it's lovely to hear your voice, and I'm looking forward to our chat. So, Michelle, tell me, how do you describe yourself? How do you describe what you do?
How do I describe what I do? Well, I feel like I have, over the course of the past 5 years, really got connected to my passion, and that's, becoming a real vocal advocate for mental health. Professionally, I've worked in the pharmaceutical industry about 19 years now, but through the course of writing my story, I've gotten really connected and become even more aware of the stigma that still lives around mental health. So I think that you could say that I'm a mental health advocate.
Yeah.
So that's what gets me excited, making a difference in that realm.
So you said you worked in the sort of pharmaceuticals industry. Just tell me a little bit about your life and your career.
Yeah, sure. So New Jersey is known as the medicine chest of the U.S. We have several pharmaceutical companies, and I think I've worked at about 5 of them. I am in the regulatory quality space right now, but I have many years in medical education and regulatory operations behind me. I started my career as a secretary and sort of worked my way up, something I'm proud of. And went to school along the way. I didn't go to school right after, my high school years. I took some time off and got an extended education while working.
That must have been tough, sort of splitting your life in two like that. Because people don't. I mean, I know I've done sort of postgraduate educational, education when you've been working, and it's actually very hard to juggle the demands of that, isn't it?
It is, but I think you're much more open to learning. I loved the experience of being in school, even though I was working full time. I just had a different mindset as an adult than I did younger.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Because there seems to be an established track that people leave. We call it school here, then go to college or university, and then you get a sort of degree or something, and then you go to work, and then sort of development's left very much to chance for the rest of your life. And it does seem to be the case that, we're seeing the rise of people in the 40s and 50s and 60s, retraining, re-educating. And it's absolutely, it's such a great opportunity, isn't it? Not just for your career, but also for your well-being and your mental health.
Yeah, because you're growing and you're learning, and I think when you can take your applied experience in the workforce and then combine that with your journey as a student, as a lifelong student, it's just such a great recipe for ongoing lifelong learning.
Mm. And how was life growing up for you? Because you had some challenges, I understand.
I did. I grew up with a bipolar mother. And so she was very much example of bipolar. She had rapid mood cycling from serious depression, where she would be crying, uncontrollably for an extended period of time, have to be then hospitalized, undergo intense treatment. And then other times she would be extremely manic, and that would have her, up all night, day after day, running around, just being completely, energized, over-energized, if you will. So it was it's definitely a challenge for me. I think as a child, you try to figure out your environment and what's normal. Yes. And I didn't really have a lot of consistency because she was so all over the board, and that's hard for a child, not to have consistency and know what to expect at home. It was always a roller coaster.
And you see, that's interesting, because I was just going to ask you, did that matter in a way? The fact that she was all over. I mean, did that matter?
It did, because I would try really hard. I learned how to read a room when I was young, how to read her mood and adjust accordingly. Right. But coming home after school, for example, something very simple, opening the door and not knowing if she was going to be in a good mood, if she was going to be angry, or if she was going to be crying. It was just this whole volatile space. And then I had to take the temperature of the room and understand, okay, this is the role I have to play today.
And that must be challenging. I mean, I suppose you come to a certain stage or a certain age where you start to assume some level of responsibility almost, or need to join in or to help. That must be a challenge.
It was. I mean, but I didn't know any better. If you took any child and put them in that situation after they have an established normal, that's the big upset. But for me, I didn't know any different. And all I knew was that my father needed me to do things that needed to be done in the house. If she was, struggling with her depression for a week and not cleaning the house or looking after the kitchen or cooking dinner, that was just what I had to do. Because that's what was needed, and we were a family, and that's what you do. So,
wow. What effects do you think that's left on you? Because in some ways, I guess there's a negative, but in many ways there'll be some real positives as well, I suppose.
Exactly. I write about. It's so funny. Because I had to go through a lot of healing to come to a place to write my book from love and compassion and forgiveness, to be honest with you, because I had harbored a lot of anger toward my mother. Yeah. It shaped me. It shaped me in ways that I still am challenged by, but also shaped me in ways that I'm so grateful for. And in the back of the book, I actually have an epilogue where I share, look at all the amazing attributes I have because of that experience. Resiliency is one of them, obviously. But I think the other, the thing I learned as a child that I still am trying to unlearn as an adult is putting everyone's needs before my own. That's probably one of the negative aspects of being a child caregiver, is you lose yourself in caring for your loved one and you don't even know better. Right. So, so you have to learn how to find your voice and speak your truth. As you grow older and realize how important it is to ask for what you want. Mm. So, but yeah.
Do you think there's an element where you sort of have to grow up a bit too fast?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, while other kids were in class, focusing on their studies, I was worrying if my mother was okay at home. If, when I came home after school, she was going to still be okay. That's not something a child should be worrying about, but that's what I worried about was, I just stayed home with her for a few days. Dad needed me to stay out of school to look after her. And now I'm back at school. Is she going to be okay? I'm not there watching her. So you have a role reversal, I think, in those scenarios where a child quickly becomes, plays the role of the adult.
And it must be hard to get over a sense of blame, I suppose, because there must be some sort of sense of resentment that builds up in the child. Whilst they don't know any different, there must be then a comparison as you grow up, looking at other people and thinking, well, look at them enjoying themselves while I'm home looking after my mother. I mean, how does that manifest itself?
Yeah, I think I got a glimpse of that mostly in my girlfriends and seeing my girlfriend's relationship with their mother and seeing how carefree that relationship was, and starting to recognize my life wasn't as normal as I thought it was. And I did have a lot of resentment because I had a lot of responsibility up until my mother passed away. Even in my 20s, I had a lot of burden and responsibility on me to try to keep her at peace and happy. But it was never going to be enough for someone like that. So it was hard. I mean, it was definitely hard. But then, I then started on my own healing journey, and I did a lot of self-discovery work, and I had a lot of therapy to kind of resolve some of that and maybe take a step back and put myself in her shoes and recognize she was struggling with a mental illness and trying to be a mother. One of my leaders that I work with at J&J has been quoted as saying, the hurt cause others hurt, right? And I think that's true. She was hurting in her own way, yes, not understanding how to deal with what she was dealing with in her mind. And so she knew how to hurt others, and she did that.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate. It's a cycle.
And I mean, I don't know exactly how old you are. I don't need to, but I'm thinking if you were going back, sort of 20, 30, 20 something years, there wasn't really even a name for that condition then, was there?
I think I heard so many different variations, right? It was manic depressant, or manic depressive, bipolar, just depressed. She's just depressed. I mean, there were all kinds of things, and then all kinds of different treatments and all kinds of stories about treatments and how they went. My friend, actually, a very dear friend and colleague, Jo, she lives in the UK. She's a colleague of mine. She actually introduced me to the Secret Life of the Manic Depressant by Stephen Fry.
Yeah, I was going to mention that, yeah.
And that documentary opened my eyes to what life could have been like for my mother. And I'm so grateful that she did, because that was the first step I could start to, recognize and have some compassion for what mom was dealing with.
And it's that thing, isn't it? I mean, it's a terribly worn path and almost glib, isn't it? Talk about forgiveness, but I'm sure your mother's not doing it on purpose, but it's very hard if you're young to not to understand that. I mean, how can you understand that?
Right, because you're so focused on the effects that they are having on you.
Yeah,
and that effect is horrible. My mom was physically abusive, emotionally abusive, mentally abusive, and this is just who she was. But as I got older, I started to recognize there's a human being and then there's the disease. And if you can separate the two, you will recognize that the person that is your mother, or the person that is your loved one, is truly a beautiful, loving, caring soul. And then they have a disease.
Yes.
So therein lies the power to recognize your loved one for who they are, and then the fact that they're struggling with a disease.
And I think it's a tricky thing. It's interesting. One of the things you actually started off by saying was that mental health is, you're an advocate because there's still a stigma attached to it. And someone in my circle at the moment is going through this, and they struggle with the fact that they haven't got a leg missing or something, because actually they just seem normal to the outside world. The outside world struggles because they don't seem to have a leg missing. It just seems to be something wrong with their head. So they look normal. And you can hear the rumbling of, well, why don't you just pull yourself together? And people don't realise that this is a genuine illness. And if it was, and it's as bad, or it's difficult, it's very difficult to compare things, but it's the same as any sort of physical illness. It is an illness. It isn't something that's a lifestyle choice, or something that you sort of try on for a few years. It's a thing, isn't it?
It is so true. And and that's what's so upsetting about these invisible diseases, or invisible disability, if you will, is that if we have heart disease, or if we have diabetes, it is a disease of a specific organ. when we have a brain illness, like, why don't we relate to it as, okay, so this is the brain and it just needs additional support? Why do we relate to it in such a shameful way and be afraid to talk about it? I mean, if you had heart disease, God forbid, you would call your friend who was diagnosed last year with heart disease and say, well, what is your doctor doing? What are you getting? What kind of treatment are you doing? And you'd start to talk about it. You're not calling someone to say, hey, I was just diagnosed with blah, 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 depression, major depression, bipolar, let's talk about it. You're afraid to talk about it. And that's where we have so much opportunity to shift how people relate to brain health.
So given you posed all those questions about why is it, what's your view about why it is like that?
I think, like anything, there's shame and then there's fear, right? There's shame is I'll be perceived as weak. Then there's fear. I don't know if I'm going to be rejected from my friends and family or accepted. And then there's fear of, oh gosh, like what kind of treatment am I going to get? And is it even going to help me? And so shame and fear are the two biggest reasons why I think people think that they have to muscle it out or tough it out on their own. And it's just so unfortunate.
And it's interesting and part of the evolution of what's going on at the moment. Certainly in the UK, there's a big drive to recognise mental health as an issue. But we've almost now gone to the other extreme now, where we're sort of saying, well, if someone comes in and they're mildly irritated today, that's a mental health issue. And that somewhat worries me because it sort of negates the people who have the serious...
Yes.
The serious clinical conditions rather than a sort of emotionally driven condition. And I think sometimes this is part of the evolution of awareness, isn't it? A bit like happened with stress. After a word, if we're not careful, the term becomes meaningless. So we have to be quite clear that mental health is not about socialising it. It's about learning to accept it as it is, really. Rather than pretending it's something else, rather than pretending it's just about, we feel a bit down today, therefore we have a mental illness. It's not really that. It's something, it is that proper condition. And I know we're talking about degrees of, shades of grey here, but I just do think there's a risk as we begin to socialise and normalise the word that we lose the sight of the importance of what the thing is we're trying to normalise in a way.
Yeah, and I think it has a lot to do with education,
right.
And it has a lot to do with being responsible with our words, right? I mean, I've heard this before where people throw around the term, oh, he's having a mood swing, so he's bipolar.
Exactly.
It's like if that's the kind of language that will diminish what truly is a mental illness. So I don't know. I think there needs to be more open conversations to have people understand how to speak about it responsibly. So it's not just so easily tossed around and you're diminishing what other people are truly diagnosed with.
And I think that's right, because certainly in our world of resilience, I almost see sometimes people trying on a mental health condition, saying, oh, does this fit me? I've read this label. It's almost like when you troll the internet for diseases,
Exactly.
And I see people who are defining themselves by something that helped, and they tried on the wear it for a few months, and they said, no, I don't fancy that now. I'll have stress instead. That's a bit more glamorous, and it is. And I know I'm exaggerating for effect, but it is that situation where if you've got these things, you don't pretend and you don't mess about. But the trouble is, the huge welter of noise in this area stops the real help getting to those people that actually need it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, self-diagnosis is always a scary thing, right? I think if you're struggling yourself and you don't feel like you have the level of joy in your life you deserve, you should absolutely get a professional's assessment so that if you have a clinical diagnosis, and then how to treat that instead of self-diagnosing and, thinking that you can cure yourself by doing some, things on your own. I don't know. That's just my opinion. But I think, you could try on a lot of different things if you're not careful after you troll the internet. So it's just a caution,
Yeah. Whilst it's fashionable, it's not clever to be taking the resources away from people that need it. I mean, this sort of bipolar thing can run through different generations. Has that been, or can also affect all sorts of relationships? Has that been your experience?
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember giving a talk to a bunch of scientists. It was funny because I didn't recognize I had so many scientists in the room when I was sharing my story, and I was very, very proud to say, this is my mother and this is her story, and oh, I'm adopted. And I am adopted. And so I had these individuals challenge me and say, it's nurture versus nature, Michelle. You could still be affected, because I thought, I'm not going to have bipolar disorder. I am not her biological child. But being in that environment for so long did affect me.
Right.
My environment itself affected me. I struggle in New Jersey right now. I don't know if I could ever live in the UK. No disrespect. But I struggle with these long, dark, gray days of the winter. And I struggle with seasonal depression because of it.
Yeah.
And, is that something that came out of my experience being with a woman who sat depressed, crying for days and days, and just knowing what that felt like being in her space? It could. I don't know. But, I've heard of people who have generations of, different mental illnesses that they see in their family members.
That's a really fascinating thought, isn't it? That actually, because one would assume that something that is purported to be genetic wouldn't really have a societal or cultural or family sort of effect. But I suppose you were almost shaped, from a very early age to see that as the way adult behaviour is.
Yes.
So it is more likely. It's fascinating, isn't it? And the trouble is, you can have a false attribution to something, because you might have always had. I mean, your birth mother might have had that, and it might be nothing to do. But what a fascinating thing. I've never really looked into that area. I shall have to have a look at that.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I just know what that feeling was like. It's almost like spend some time with someone who is clinically depressed and in a very dark place and unmedicated, and see how that affects you. And I think that's basically what I experienced for several years as a child.
Yeah.
My mom was medicated, but then took herself off of medication. Compliance is one of the biggest challenges with people who struggle with mental illness.
Yes.
She thought she was fine. She took herself off, and she would be even more depressed.
Yes. How did your father cope?
Oh, that man was a saint. I say this to this day. I loved him, and I realize now he really did the best he could. He never left her side. He worked really hard. He worked for IBM. He had a long, healthy career with IBM, and he provided whatever he could for her. And he had to be the one to take her to the mental institutions when she was so sick that she needed to be, hospitalized for periods of time.
Yeah.
So it was hard for him. It was really hard for him.
Wow. I mean, this is resilience, isn't it? It's that ability to just weather that storm and take every single day as it comes, and it's a very, very tough place to be. There's no doubt about it.
Yep.
So how did this affect your relationships rolling on? Because often if you've lived in that environment, you can end up being I don't forget the phrase, you often end up is it marrying your father or marrying a mother or something? Have you fallen into that as well?
I talk about that in one of my chapters. It's so funny because you gravitate toward what is familiar, not toward what is good for you.
Yeah.
And so that's what I found myself doing at a very young age to get away from my mother. I gravitated to someone who was exactly like my mother.
Hey.
And then had to go through a lot of therapy after that experience. But yeah, it definitely affects you. I mean, speaking my truth, that's something I still struggle with even as a 47-year-old woman, speaking up for what I want in a relationship and, having my voice be heard. And those are all things that come from, putting your needs on the shelf when you care for someone.
Fascinating. And so you've written the book. Did the book come after the therapy? So in other words, this was a memoir, or was the book part of the therapy?
Oh, wow. So my story goes like this. I lost my mother. My mother, I was very upset about my mother, and I had a very dear friend of mine recommend doing the Landmark Forum. So I did the Landmark Forum and a bunch of Landmark self-discovery work.
Right.
And then I was invited to give a TED Talk on the TED stage. Johnson & Johnson has a private license for the TED stage. So we had a TED forum, and I actually was the first time I told my story was on that TED stage. And the response from that gave me the confidence to embark on writing my book. So when I started to write my book, I had gone through a lot of self-discovery work, a lot of therapy, and I got connected to my message on the TED stage. And then, fortunately, I had turned my anger and resentment into love and forgiveness and compassion, so that when I sat down to write my story, it was a much different story than it would have been had I been angry.
Right.
And so it took 4 years to write my book, and it was a 4-year, very cathartic experience, reliving a lot of what I had grown up in.
So I'm guessing when you're writing a book, you have to relive the whole experience, don't you?
You do.
So how does that work?
That's why it took 4 years, Russell. Yes. So I'm not a writer. I'm just a girl that had a story. So I knew I needed help. So I had a writing coach guide me through the writing process. So she would oftentimes have me rewrite things over and over, and then say to me, you have to bring your reader with you on that experience. So you really have to relive that. So I need you to relive that and then rewrite it. And so I would spend my weekends like hysterically crying, but I would come out with a piece that represented that experience so the reader could understand what it was like.
Wow. And that must be interesting, because that sort of experiential writing really makes it leap off the page. I know you've had, we're talking about the book, we've not actually talked about, said what it is, but I know I'm just reading the reviews, which are stunning, really. They all talk about this fact it leaps off the page. You know, there's a sort of a connection with the material, and that's because I guess you were reliving it as you were writing it.
Yeah, and that gets me so excited, because my goal was to humanize the experience of someone with a mental illness so people could start to understand it, and just like we were talking about, maybe fear it less.
Yes.
Or, be less ignorant to what it is. So I'm so glad that people have really given that feedback, because I want them to get what that experience was like.
And so I'm guessing you're a published author. So you're going to be writing another 77 books, or not?
I don't know. Maybe I'll write another one. But I'm really connected to this mission of causing change around mental illness. So I think I want to focus on this right now. But maybe.
Well, let's discuss how people can get hold of you and how get hold of the book, and talk a bit about your website as well, because you've got a magnificent website with a lot of really useful contacts and things. So why don't you tell us about that?
Sure. Thanks for asking. Okay, so my website is, first of all, the book is called Breaking Into My Life, Growing Up with a Bipolar Parent and My Battle to Reclaim Myself. You can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. My website, which you can contact me through, is breakingintomylife.com. And on my website, I have a blog, I have statistics around mental illness, I have a free excerpt. If you don't want to buy the book, you can read a free excerpt there. And there's also resources, which I try to refresh as frequently as I can to share with people, really good resources and tools that they can tap into and get support, whether they're a caregiver or someone themselves struggling.
Did you have someone in mind as an audience for the book when you wrote it? Because I'm just wondering, because it sort of raises the question: who is this for? Is it for the people who are experiencing what you did? Is it for practitioners? Because sometimes practitioners don't really get the personal story. They see it sort of third party removed. So who is it for?
It's funny, because at the end of the writing process, I struggled with that, because I feel like it does. It's for anyone who's just wanting to understand what life is like loving and caring for someone with mental illness. But then also, I've had people write me who have bipolar disorder who have said to me, thank you for the perspective that you've given me. I now understand the impact I might be having on my own loved ones. So it could be someone struggling with bipolar or a mental illness, to give them a different perspective. So it's really, I don't want to say it's for one. I just think it creates, it's an experience that I think anyone can benefit from.
And I noticed that you send people off to the videos about Black Dog and such like, which are really good videos that help people understand some of the early symptoms of depression and such like. You've got some really good resources on here. And I think for us, the Stephen Fry thing, obviously him being a Brit, he's done so much to popularise and allow something like bipolar to just to be seen as something that can affect anybody. And I think what I'm finding fascinating is that your mum was just a sort of an ordinary person who had this remarkable thing, and anyone can have this, can't they? And that makes your story remarkable, because actually you were dealing with someone who was facing something that was quite problematical themselves. Right.
And I have to leave you with a tool that I think is so important. I like to share this with my audiences all the time. I think what we need to do is create spaces for people to feel comfortable talking about mental health. And I can tell you to go out and cause a conversation, but it's awkward as heck. So I'm not going to ask you to do that. But there's a great resource that two of my peers created called 18%.org. It's the number 18 with the word percent written out.org. It is a free peer-to-peer online community where if you think you might be diagnosed with something, you can go in there and talk to other people in different chat rooms about what you're feeling. And they can say to you, oh, well, I have the same thing, and this is what I'm doing, or this is the kind of help that I've received, and this is how I felt when I was newly diagnosed. And that connection and that conversation is going to help people feel less isolated. Great. So I'd love for people to check that out.
Yeah, just give us that resource again, please.
Sure. It's www, the number 18, the word percent written out.org.
I'm doing it now. You've got me so fascinated. I'm already doing it. Here we are. This is a fascinating podcast. Listening to an old man typing on the computer, looking something up on the computer. Here we go. Oh yeah, this is great.
Yeah, that's good.
Good. Oh, thank you for that. This has been great. I really, really enjoyed talking to you, and I've learned so much. And it's remarkable. I mean, I know what it takes to write a book, and I know what it takes to write a book when you're doing a full-time job at a very senior level. So kudos to you. But I think you're right. I think it's remarkable to have people like you as advocates, and please keep doing the work, and please write another book.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for raising this conversation. And, I want people to know that no matter what you've been through, no matter what you've lived through, no matter what experience you've had, you have it within you to create your future from where you are. So anything is possible. If I could bounce back from this and be a force for change, I think pretty much people can just do the work and create that future that you deserve.
Superb. Oh, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I think it's been really brilliant. And Michelle's website is breakingintomylife.com, and her book is the same name. Michelle, thank you so much for taking time with us today. Please take care.
Thank you.
We hope you found today's podcast useful. If you did, why not subscribe and listen to our other podcasts? We would love it if you could leave us a review. To access our resilience coaching, contact us at info@qedod.com. And finally, if you'd like to download our free resilience ebook, go to qedod.com/free ebook. Thanks for listening.